on? Can I be heard, first of all? Should I rate? I may as well do this test while I have 2 minutes. Do I need to raise lower volume, or am I coming in loud and clear for you all? All right, excellent. Anyway, I'll give everything 1 more minute. I'll probably tweet the stream out as well on my personal Twitter. Don't worry if you can hear the keyboard though, because obviously I'm not going to be like typing up any storms whilst I do this. So first things first, let's go to Twitter and oh, there we go. Just retweeted from here, and there we are. Excellent, excellent. All right, well, it is 5:30 Central. I suppose now it is time to start. Hello to you all. I'm Aeon of Dreams, known mostly for Be of Anything Pony stuff. Some of you, if you're bronies, might know my... the content I make with Lightning Bliss, or certain analysis videos I especially used to do with fans and friends. So, with fans and friends, I do now have a persona, so I suppose I'm relevant to that now. You can thank my girlfriend and head of volunteers, Sammy, or Sambo the Lion. His name is Mischief, but he's not known for much. But if you, in the chat, if you wish to address me as either, then I am more than happy to respond to either. So now I suppose we'll get started with a few things. First off,
warning! Warning! Stream tip overload! All hands, prepare for exploded broken Fiora in 5, 4, 3,
sorry,
2, 1. Detonation imminent.
Okay, let's see if I'm back now. Should be no desktop. Good. All right, am I back? Says I'm live. Sorry about all this, everyone who came to watch. I'm actually quite new to streaming. Okay, thank you. As that example shows, I'll just wait for a few more replies that everything is working, and there we go. All right. Great. Now that all my newbiness has been on display, I think we can finally get started, because I think I finally got it under control. I say before something else goes wrong again. But anyways, hello everyone. Now to get started for real this time. Welcome to my panel at RAMCon, which is actually the first panel I've ever really held for anything. So what this panel is about essentially is over the years, I've read a lot of stuff related to Jung and Jungian psychology and various similar philosophers in a similar vein, and I read a lot of occultism, which I got into back in 2013. Now, halfway through 2012, I also got into MLP, and that's when I became a brony. And I noticed there are certain things I could apply, either it used to be philosophy, but now mostly occultism too. And I've been meaning to make a video on this for a while, but I thought, hey, an online panel would also be pretty good. I can also interact with people about it. But before I start, I should probably give a few disclaimers for maybe some more seriously inclined, and just for integrity reasons. First is that I'm not initiated into any orders, nor do I have any formal education in Jungian psychology. All of this is recreational to me. I'm also not claiming, when I talk about any of this, that MLP was ever intentionally made to be some sort of occult esoteric masterpiece, or that Lauren Faust is secretly a Golden Dawn Freemason. There are reasons these ideas can appear in things, or just seemingly in anything. But I'm still very aware that this is My Little Pony, and as much as I love this cartoon, it isn't the same sort of thing as like Shakespeare, Goethe, or Dante, which more likely has these symbols intentionally. I guess when I talk about some other occult concepts, there are going to be a lot of references to words in other languages, or there may be. I know I'm going to butcher them. I'm not fluent in ancient Egyptian, nor Hebrew, nor Icelandic Norse, or anything like that. So I'm going to be having a very Englishified pronunciation of them, and especially Americanified pronunciation of them, if I know those aren't words, but you get what I mean. So this is also based on my own understanding of these systems, because someone more familiar with a lot of these systems might say, hey, you got something wrong here or there. Well, this is more an amalgamation of everything that I've read and a lot of things I found consistent. This is not me professing to be any sort of expert in, again, a system I'm not initiated in. Like, I'm not a member of the OTO, the Golden Dawn, or the Temple of Set, or anything like that. Yes, it was a fanfiction story. It was just really symbolic, and I do love it for that. That is one of my favorite fun classic stories, is that it really is just fan fiction that everyone just took seriously. Right. So a lot of the differences between systems might actually just be semantic, of which clarification can probably be given. Although I still consider myself a student of these things, not a master of these things. But yes, my use of, because I'm going to be talking about archetypes, use of gender here is more superficial and based on archetypes, and is very informal. It is not a reference to biological gender. So for instance, I'm going to reference Twilight as the hero, and I know that has a male connotation, but I'm just doing that for sake of general clarity of the concept. It can apply to either heroes or heroines, is how I mean that. And again, this panel it's fun, it's not advocating anything, and lastly, I'm going to bring up examples of the ideas as they appear in MLP, but they may actually be poorly written. So this is not a defense of MLP's writing in any way. A poorly written idea is still a poorly written idea. It's just cool if it happens to agree with the ideas and the theories. So with all that out of the way, let's actually begin. So when I say MLP is a sort of occult psychological narrative, what I exactly mean by that is this. MLP gives you a cool and interesting story about initiation. And thank you for the note on that, Okeshiromi, because I do use a Hebrew word later to illustrate a point. But anyway, it is specifically a initiation story of a magician, or at least that's what I most see in it. And by magician, I don't refer to stage magic. I refer to like magi, or as Crowley would put it, magic with a K. The stuff you see in order is not stage trickery, sleights of hand, or stuff meant to dazzle a crowd, because it's really none of that. So to start with this story, we're going to start with how the hero gets initiated, and the way we start with that is where the hero is. So our hero is obviously Twilight Sparkle, and right off the bat we have a social creation story. Now this is different than an overall creation myth, although this is the closest MLPS. It's the creation of their society. Am I still really low to a lot of people, or am I good? I am low, I can boost it a little bit. Isn't that good? Alright, I'll carry on. Let's see. So we get a social creation myth. And obviously we know, as the viewers, this isn't a myth. It really is the history of how Equestria was made. And it really did, for real, start, as everyone in Equestria knows it, with the banishing of Nightmare Moon. So here I'm going to have to kill a sacred cow. And namely, I'm talking about Silverquill. So I suppose sacred pigeon. He does make a couple videos talking in detail about how much he believes Celestia is the Great Mother and Luna is the crone. And I have to say, I think he's respectfully very incorrect. I do think that a lot of the examples, some examples for that can be well argued for, but I feel it's a bit reachy. And when we talk about Luna later, there is an element that I'll address Luna as crone later, but for Celestia to be the father, all that means is she established society, basically. She established culture. So the mother is nature and the father is culture. And the father is associated with the sun, the mother with the moon. And that is ultimately what she has done. Is a long time ago, she established the Equestria as everyone has known it for literally 1,000 years. And back in that day, Celestia wasn't the Great Father. She was originally the original hero. I am going to go into some detail about it, so Witter, there are spoilers in here. But anyway, and just a warning to everyone, if you haven't seen it, there are spoilers to future season specials and villains, but okay. Now, when Celestia is back 1,000 years ago establishing Equestria, she is actually the hero. She's not the father yet because she hasn't founded Equestria yet. And she had to essentially come up with a concept or meaning to build this society around. But that society had to be valid, and that's essentially one thing that the hero does at the beginning of society. They have an idea, which the society is based around, and they have to establish it. And they have to establish it to many things and many tests. And the first thing you do is you have to establish it with nature. So nature back then was very chaotic and unharmonious, and so when Celestia establishes society all those thousands of years ago, she confronts all these villains and trials and tribulations, and eventually ending up with her sister. She creates what we call an Aeon. Now, people who have seen my content may remember I did make a video about applying the Aeons of our world to Equestria, which is kind of... There are some things about that I regret, but one should also acknowledge that in Equestria, they could be seen as having their own Aeons. In this sense, Celestia's initial Aeon would be the Aeon of Harmony, the concept which a lot of Equestrian society was initially founded on, and a lot of their social order is founded on that, especially given what we see before when they were all separate tribes, everything was chaotic, and they all nearly got killed by Wendigos. So, Harmony is what brought them all together and unified them under sort of one country, state, or what have you. And so, by winning all those trials and successfully making a stable society, which was her ultimate goal, and she succeeds in that, she establishes the Aeon of Harmony. Now, what is an Aeon? An Aeon is a period of spiritual, social, and you might say cognitive development, and mostly spiritual, that influences the, you might say, evolutionary destiny of a people, or of humanity, or in this case, ponies. Because it is their culture. So, but there's a problem here. Many people will know in the show that it's almost a meme to quote about how there was 1,000 years between when all the epic ancient stuff happened and the present day. And what it does show is that Celestia is a good symbol of the father archetype. She kept society around for 1,000 years and even managed to seemingly not have any conflict in it, or at least none that this show will ever even consider as relevant to get into. So, that all seems fine and good, but they can't keep this society forever. The forces of entropy are always in motion. So when the hero becomes the father, you need to remember fathers eventually grow old. People grow old. Establishments get old. And as time moves on, they don't always work like they used to. For instance, you probably still could use a horse-drawn buggy to go to the store, but it's horribly impractical. And a lot of and society isn't what it used to be a long time ago with dirt paths and quiet trails that wouldn't freak out the horse. Now it's automobiles, and they have all this so much more convenience, and a lot more is built around them. So eventually we all gave way to have an automobile. Much the same way, eventually society starts to have entropy as time goes on. So, or to put it another way, Osiris grows old. And by growing old, he eventually becomes more set in his ways and becomes blinded, and he will never know that the Egyptian god Set is ready to stalk behind him and knock him out. And now the time has come for that to roost. So, the first challenge of the hero is to establish what they represent to the Dark Mother and nature. Because otherwise, if it doesn't mean anything, you never would advance beyond that. Or it never would be able to advance beyond that. So, who is the Dark Mother? Well, it's obviously Nightmare Moon. And so Celestia established it to all this chaotic past. It is now Twilight's turn to understand what happens, to establish herself in front of the Dark Mother, literally at her feet, to show that she can be initiated. Because when we see Twilight first, she's a pre-initiate. She lives in society, but is not really a participant in it, and through her isolation, she's very much an isolationist, and very much an armchair theorist. She doesn't know anything really about the real world or its experiences, so naturally her wise mentor sets her on an adventure. And this adventure is to gain experience to see, because you need to know how the world works, and you've got to integrate that within you. Now, Twilight obviously runs into a massive problem. When she finally is confronted with Nightmare Moon, and all along the way, she quickly realizes that her armchair-isms, compared to someone actually experiencing the world like the Dark Mother, it's utterly worthless. It falls to pieces. And now the initiate, and this is very true of real initiates, like if you go to a lot of Masonic initiations, a lot of shamanic initiations, they give you something akin to a death experience, or at least the genuine fear of death is put in you even if there's no risk of it. This is why the Freemason, or a lot of Masonic groups, not just the Freemasons, might seal you in a casket for a while to initiate the symbolic death and leave you in there until your brain breaks you just a little bit. Or you might take the shaman's brew and do that. Or other groups will lead you into a dark cave and then you're just left in pitch darkness for 3 days. So, now, but Twilight's theory of the world and her idea of how to save the world, Mitch will actually address that later, and her idea of saving the world, well, she keeps rejecting all that nature is offering to her. Here are friends. Friends are important. They're harmonious, and hey, friendship, that's going to be an interesting theme later, right? Well, she keeps rejecting it all in terms of what she thinks she needs, within essentially all just that she read in books and barely knows anything about. So she's now confronted with Nightmare Moon. She sees the exotic symbols of her salvation crushed in front of her. And now there's a very real chance that she is going to die until the moment where she is initiated and she is established as the hero. And what establishes a hero is fundamentally that they think being is worth it. That's one thing. And the second thing, a hero must be transformative, because this is what the father loses when they become the father. They become more set in their ways and the established order of things until entropy knocks it down. So the hero must be transformative to be able to adjust to this. And this is what Twilight shows when she finally decides to embrace the concept of friendship. So, in doing this, she redeems the Great Mother and releases the dead or dying father, and the idea is the hero must also update the father. Because Luna Nightmare Moon was really the adversary of the father in particular. We're going to talk about the adversary of the hero further down the line. Because she was able to, she has adapted enough to the times to know exactly how to take out the ruling social order. So the hero must go back, reestablish it, and then update the father so it does not happen again. And this goes a long way with trying to reintegrate Luna into modern society and to reunite the sisters and all this other stuff. And so, but I would like to establish with this that despite what Silverquill may tell you, as much as I love the guy, Luna is not the crone. Believe it or not, the rebellion of the Great Mother into the Dark Mother and then her subsequent redemption by the hero has been in mythologies for literally thousands of years. And the hero is needed to do it because the hero is, you might say, is almost a heroic version of the adversary to the Great Mother. He or she is capable of defeating that. He, she, or they is capable of defeating, redeeming, and transforming the world through their conflict with the Mother and their defeat of them. So, Luna isn't the crone because Luna never really failed. In fact, the Mother's Rebellion is present in, for instance, Sumerian mythology. This is Tiamat, who is redeemed by Marduk. But the Egyptians have a better story that I like further. You see, there's a book by J.D. Gunther. He's a Jungian Thelemite. So if you love Jungian psychology and initiations, if you're into Thelema, read his books, Initiation to the Aeon of the Child and The Angel in the Abyss. He talks about a particular story where Horus, the Egyptian hero, encounters this with Isis, the goddess, not the group. You see, originally the concept of motherhood was something a bit more in line with nature, but it had problems, and this is why aeons exist. Aeons exist and they get updated through time as we realize things and we realize that certain roles change and develop through time and history and spiritually. So the problem with the mother here is that at this point in Egyptian mythology, it's what we call an Osirisian religion, meaning male or masculine divinity has been recognized. We also now have a true understanding of death or death mysteries. And this was usually symbolized by the procession of the sun. By the procession of the sun, where it was believed the sun would die, only be reborn and come back. And there was also the establishment of societies as opposed to everyone just being nomadic like it was during the Aeon of Isis, which was the Aeon of the Great Mother, where the feminine divinity was recognized as Mother Earth. But masculine divinity was a mystery at the time. So, in a lot of Osiris, so the Isisian mother was unfortunately a sort of, she'll help you, but she'll sabotage you at the same time. She doesn't really necessarily mean to, that's just how, I know I'm really glossing over this here, but that's just kind of how it was back then. That was the concept of, that was as advanced as the concept of motherhood went at the time. So, in Egyptian mythology, we have Horus is trying to avenge his father from the Egyptian god Set, and he almost wins at one point, but he is sabotaged by his own mother who raised him to defeat him. Horus, being the hero, can confront the dark side of the mother, and in doing so, nonchalantly rips her head off. After which, the book talks about how Isis became sort of a hypostasis of herself, called Hathor. This is where the origin of that is, the cow-headed goddess. So, now you have a concept, the old concept of Isis and the new concept of Hathor, and she is the concept of a mother as we know it more or less today. And this is why, and I know this, I'm going to have to explain this, but this is why Luna isn't the crone. The mother is supposed to go into being the Dark Mother at times. And then they are redeemed by, and then there's a redemption by the hero. And also, Luna's role since then has kind of always been the mother's role. She uses her deep, intimate, personal experience to address you one-on-one, whereas Celestia addresses people as a extroverted public figure. Luna is more content to reach you at your most intimate and most exposed moments, and knows your deepest inner nature and secrets to assist you. She is very much still the mother. Now, anyway, now that we've established who the father and the mother are in Equestria, and that sort of ideal of, like, this is ideal nature, this is ideal culture, and then we got the hero, who is Twilight. The hero must confront various challenges, as Celestia did a long time ago, to establish harmony. Because now Twilight is pursuing this idea of friendship, and she has to establish it. So, one thing I'm going to do is, this is going to be slightly out of order because I do bring up Tyrek before I bring up Twilight becoming an Alicorn. And that's because putting these two together both symbolize the same sort of idea or the same sort of concept, although Discord, I think, did it better. And that is, she has to confront chaos and power. Because if you're establishing an idea, and chaos the introduction or injection of chaos ruins your idea, like it can't establish an order of some kind with which you can explore and interact with the world, then it's arbitrary, it's propaganda, it doesn't mean anything, and it certainly isn't helpful to anyone. And it also has to win against power, because you still have to make a society where you can't just, or a group or an idea that can't just be overthrown because someone either physically, that's the superficial one, or psychologically or spiritually can just overpower the idea. In that sense, why would anyone follow it? So, and these two ideas take no prisoners. Entropy is not just going to, and power are not just going to arbitrarily stop at a certain point. They will continue until you have completely rotted away. Or until the society is rotted away. Like if, so an example of an antagonist like this would be like, oh, a bank robber. If we didn't have a system to handle bank robbers, then, let's be real, bank robbers would continue to rob the banks until everything was dry. That's why we have policemen. That would be an antagonist of society, a really basic one. And without that, everything falls into chaos because the sheer brute force power of a bank robber, who, let's be real, they're usually a lot more blunt and threatening, they would just overrun everything, and that would be, that'd be the end of it. Now, what Discord shows, probably, I would argue, a little bit better than Tyrek, is that you can't just have exoteric objects mean something more than what they esoterically mean. Now let me unpack that. Exoteric and esoteric. Exoteric means that which is superficial, and esoteric is similar to occult, the word occult, meaning that which is hidden. So, the exoteric idea of the, say, elements of harmony is just that they're trinkets. They're jeweled trinkets that you wear, and the power is in the trinket, rather than in the character of the person themselves. That would be the esoteric thing, the thing that is immanent and within you. And the series actually has a scene almost explicitly laying that out, where everyone has been discorded, they have their, effectively, trinkets around their neck, and it doesn't do anything because they don't mean anything anymore. Or at least that's never what they were about. When she reestablishes their friendships and reminds them what it is, and they realize, hey, wait, this is still worth something, they then establish to Discord, when they turn him into stone for real this time, that this is a potent force in the universe that has sufficiently dealt with chaos, personified by him. And yeah, again, with Tyrek, it's still present. I don't think it's as well written, though. And, because I know Rainbow Power was established, but it's also like, I don't know, it just seems like a more lower res version of what we said there. So, there's another thing illustrated by this too. You have to demonstrate that you can handle the old threats and problems of the previous aeon, or those will rise up again. And this is what happens when, you might say, we have an equinox of the gods, as Aleister Crowley put it. When aeons are changing, Yes. When aeons are changing, this is referred to as an equinox of the gods, and if you go into the Thelemite timeline of aeons, the last time this happened was March 20th, 1904, and the Book of the Law was written in April of that year as well. But you have to, either way, you have to establish that you can handle the old threats and problems or they will rise up again, and the ultimate decider of this, because you're trying to establish your idea, is fate. You don't have to understand it yet, because when you achieve mastery is when you finally figure out what it was all about in a lot of initiatory systems. So, now that we have a couple examples of them establishing themselves, and obviously the other villain specialists have them establishing themselves against other concepts as well, let's talk about Twilight becoming an alicorn in terms of initiation. This is, if you look at a lot of Golden Dawn systems, very similar to the idea of the rank of Adeptus Minor. Now, a lot of magic systems have about a midpoint, and at this midpoint is where this is about as far as most material teachers, or as far as like most masters will let you go, and then you're governed by yourself, because at this point you're now united with what they would say is your personal divinity. In some cases, it's literally referred to as a spark, similar to how it was in the first episode. A lot of Kabbalistic literature will refer to it as a spark. It's activated upon initiation, but it's more realized at this mid-ranking, and in Golden Dawn systems it is called Adeptus Minor, and is affiliated with a point on the Sephiroth tree, which is a diagram that shows their ranking system. At a midpoint, there's one called Tefereth. It means beauty. And at this point, you are united with what they refer to as like your holy guardian angel, personal daemon. This is essentially Aura Ankefen Konsu, which means myself made perfect. It is like the divine version of you. And it is really the only deity you really ever need. Essentially, literally a divine version of yourself. And when you unify with this force, you no longer need the physical teacher. They have led you as far as you can go, and now it is your divinity must guide. Your own divinity must be your guiding teacher now. Otherwise, you may be led astray by the biases of a so-called master. After all, the master protects you from his influence more so than anything else, so that you may learn to cultivate yourself. And that is shown within the series. Twilight no longer really needs to report to Celestia unless she really wants to, and so it's a state of almost self-governance, and that is what you achieve on Adeptus Minor. And it is usually, if not almost always, a joyous occasion marked by a literal blessing of a solar deity in a place where you have achieved this through your own effort, and you've got yourself a little bit more figured out. Alright, so our initiate is now able to more or less act in the world, and now what is left but for her to have her own adversary. And the particular character I have picked for this is Starlight Glimmer. Now, what's interesting about adversaries is that I'm going to mark them in the stream as being different than a normal antagonist. You see, a normal antagonist could be anyone who opposes, just anyone who opposes you. So, like the bank robber, for instance. But the bank robber isn't an adversary. Most societies have something to stop the bank robber from ruining absolutely everything. So in that sense, a bank robber is not an adversary. He's not a real threat to the social order. However, a true adversary is almost tailor-made to break the system that they're in. All the errors of society or your own actions or the Great Father, or even your own actions, will create a lot of people, but a lot of them are just going to be antagonists. But you are going to get that one for whom every checkbox has been ticked off, and now they're almost the perfect counter to your hero. In fact, we may have rolled our eyes countless times whenever we watch a TV show and the villain is confronting the hero and says, "Aha, we're not so different, you and I." Okay, well, this is what the deeper idea that they're really trying to get a hold of, but unfortunately it is also an idea that you can just sort of botch in an attempt to sound deep. Well, this is what they're aiming for. An adversary is perfectly tailored to the hero in that they are also transformative, like the hero. Just in a very dark way. In fact, the only thing that really separates an adversary from the hero is that they have a different fundamental answer to one question, and that's, does the suffering inherent within being justify being? The hero naturally says yes, and wants to continue the system and keep updating it so it can carry on, and less people can be left out of it. But the adversary says no, the system is not worth being. And essentially their main goal is to destroy the system. And again, the decider of this sort of grand game is fate. So, the existence of the adversary does not therefore mean the adversary is correct. The adversary must confront the hero and win, because if your society really is worth preserving, then it will have produced a hero that can defend it. If it couldn't produce one, maybe out of corruption or something, then it's... how to put this? Then they would say that by divine decree, almost, in a both occult and psychological sense, like the psychological sense of the divine, by divine decree, your system or society deserves to collapse, because you couldn't produce someone who could defend it, or it was too corrupted to defend itself. A good example of this in recent times, you are going to have to be well over 18 to watch this, but HBO's Chernobyl, the protagonist of that, Valery Legasov, one could argue is an adversarial hero, because ultimately what he did led, according to Gorbachev himself, led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's a good example of that. I also recommend it just because that is an amazing show. Really good. But as you see, Starlight is also an adept at magic. She also is shaped by her own intimate experience with relationships. Now, again, we can talk all day and night about whether or not Starlight has a good backstory or a good villain motivation, but typically in most people's childhoods, I think we can all agree, it usually is something small and more relatable, not as large as fiction tends to portray. That's why a lot of people, I find, don't really talk about their problems as much. They tend to see it as a bunch of soft, petty things and or similar, but... So, ignoring the quality of her villainous backstory, she defines her backstory by loss. Twilight, on the other hand, has just gained stuff from it. So we have a magic adept, one who could rival the power of the Alicorns, and is apparently able to beat Twilight in a one-on-one magic duel, or at least is heavily implied to. And she nearly does destroy society, and to be fair, and this is another point of the adversary, is the adversary usually does have very good and like armor-piercing bullet points to their philosophy. They shouldn't be no easy fight for the hero, and in many ways there's a part of you, if they're written really well, almost wants you for them to win. Think about, or for another example of this, anyone who watches anime, if ever any of you have seen Season 1 of Psycho Pass, Makishima is almost a perfect textbook example of the adversary, right down to the point where you kind of admire him, and he's got a dangerous magnetism to him. Like, for instance... and like one of the things that a lot of reviewers have pointed out Starlight has a point in is that, for instance, why is all of equestrian society just dependent upon 6 people? Which I would agree is kind of a problem and is kind of is a very ego-driven thing. And in that sense, she almost wins if it weren't for the idea that Twilight could win her over by utilizing the very idea that she's trying to develop. Now, that further establishes that the idea is worth it, as in fate has decreed, because it worked, even if she doesn't completely understand why. Even if she doesn't really need to understand why, remember, she's still an adept. She's not herself the king yet, or queen, or princess, however you wish to quote the archetype. So, she uses her established idea to then defeat her own personal adversary. And because of course the equestrian timeline is still around, the idea has a lot more credence, and one might argue that this is Twilight's crossing of the abyss, or long night of the soul, as a lot of traditions refer to it by many names. I am going to refer to it by the Thelemite name. I believe in Christianity they would refer to it as they refer to it as long night of the soul. Either of them work. And that is where you are stripped of mostly everything. Even your personal divinity will not follow you into the abyss because you must go in there alone. And so after the adept goes into the abyss, they confront effectively the nightmarish horrors in it, and they must do so again alone. And in Twilight's case, she's not obviously stripped of her alicorn hood, but she is stripped of the idea that her alicorn hood means anything. Very effectively, I might add. Her rule and power keeps being subverted by Starlight with almost, well, actually, literally memeable level of ease. And she has to rely only on the ideas which got her up there so far, and she cannot rely on any of the superficial anythings. Again, like, I know that's a funny way of putting it, but like, again, her alicorn status, or any of the idea that you can just magic, or like use the brute force of magic to overcome this adversary, to confront a being, and this confronts a being which in Thelema is referred to as Choronzon. Now, Choronzon is a very strange entity, namely that he doesn't exist unless he is summoned. He is the delusions of the abyss, and his greatest delusion is that he thinks he exists, among other things. So when you're confronting this, but it's he's like freakishly strong, or it is freakishly strong. Similarly, Starlight she has her own sort of nihilism. She has her own nihilism about her. So Twilight is ultimately confronting that, personified as an adversary who fundamentally will beat her in a straight-up fight. You can't brute your way through it, and her idea is what gets her across, which proves that, okay, this idea really does mean something. You've gotten to the other side. And appropriately, this is when it's shortly after this that she establishes the school, because in Golden Dawn systems, when you have crossed the abyss, you become a Magister Templi, or a Master of the Temple. So you're one step away from establishing an Aeon, but you are now considered to be of an advanced enough level that you are allowed to help people along the way with their teachings or learning or what have you. And then shortly after that, it's everything kind of becomes more linear after this. Twilight's Anne of Friendship, you might say, officially begins, and let's be real, that would be her word. It's the idea that she personified the most, and it got her to be sort of a model figure that can be emulated by the people who could follow this idea to social order, and it's a better order because it dealt with the problems of the past and the present. So her word would obviously be friendship, and she, writing this concept and becoming a hero through it, becomes king, or queen, or princess, what have you. The ultimate inheritor of the kingdom, literally. And I suppose I would say... And so I would say that's ultimately this, what wraps up that big archetypal narrative of sorts, I would say. Now, I have been given a time slot a lot longer than what I initially requested, so I suppose I don't mind taking any questions. I don't mind answering like mundane questions as well, but try and keep them relevant to the panel. But if not, I'll take just any questions for the most part. but also if none, I'm totally okay ending the panel now. To which I would say, if not, then thank you to all of you who came. If you, I suppose if any of you want to talk... Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. Earlier you were talking about shamans, and I thought one of the things you were talking about was peyote. Okay. Now, that actually is a form of initiation, yes. And this is asked by Mitch Larson. Believe it or not, I did have a personal initiatory experience, but that had to do with a near-death experience. But I have experienced mescaline before, just not from a peyote. Pointing out that I do not advocate doing anything illegal, and I did this in a legal place. But I did consume a San Pedro cactus, and yeah, that is one of the things that they would use to sort of initiate shamans of that tradition. So, like, there are certain tribes which use peyote. There are other tribes which use the San Pedro, but mescaline is a good form of, and it's relevant to this, solar initiation due to mescaline having a lot of solar imagery. Solar imagery. So yes, that is one of the things I was talking about, and also I am a fan of the healing abilities of mescaline as well. Though I don't advocate anything legal. In the show, other than symbolism, and this is by Cameo Shadowness, in the show, other than symbolism, have there ever been outright literal symbols? They have been present, but it's not really any more literal than what I said here, like, because a lot of initiatory systems use what they call esoteric symbolism. So it's usually hidden behind a veil of, like, okay, you need the... You need the knowledge to know how to translate them, typically, but they're usually hidden in plain sight, and the exoteric part of it, which is the obvious part, is what that means. Typically have, I would say... it might contain, like, trace elements of it, but you'd be easily able to dismiss it as a story, much the same way that, you know, if you had an element of harmony but didn't embody the concept, you could just essentially say it's an ornate trinket, if you wish to be so dismissive about it. There are some cool, like, outright things, like, I do like that, say, runes appeared in the very forgettable end to one of the seasons with the Shadow Pony. Yeah, funny enough, he's probably the most forgettable villain. I think that was season 6. It's cool that they have runes. Now, those runes, if you bother to sit down and decode them, don't actually translate to anything really. They're just kind of there to be there. Okay, a question. But yeah, no, there aren't many that are outright obvious. All right, now... next question. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of questions to talk about Equestria Girls, and oh wait. Yeah, no, sir. And I'll talk about Disturbed Uesa. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'll address that in a moment. Or I can do it now, actually. Now, Zecora and Starlight Glimmer would be interesting, I suppose. One could look more into Zecora, but I don't actually know much about the symbolism she's borrowing from, so I really can't give, like, an educated statement as to, like, what Zecora is all about, what she means, and or what have you. Or at least I'm not comfortable doing that. Now, I have dabbled into shamanism, which can be similar, but the shamanism that I would go into really isn't relevant to what I might see within her, for instance. And as for Starlight Glimmer, no, not Starlight Glimmer, Sunset Shimmer, I'm tongue-twisty today. I would say, I have seen enough Equestria Girls to like what they eventually did with her, but I haven't seen enough Equestria Girls to, like, give, like, much of a detailed anything about her story, just that I like that they made her into a genuinely likable character. And I think that's interesting, and I do want to check that out at some point, but I haven't seen enough to really comment. Now, okay, Toyota Prius. If you could choose, what OC would you want to be canon? Huh. I mean, that's a bit of a difficult one. Like, I'm not going to go for one of the ones of my friends because there's a devil's in the details with a lot of those contracts. They will lose the right. You lose the right to a character that you make canon. I would probably make the BronyCon mascots canon, but I'm biased just because I liked that con. But I went there for about 4 years. So does anyone else have any other... Okay. Teo Vila, what would you say would be Twilight getting acquainted with her own shadow aspects and her own self-unification? Right. The closest I would get to that would be... or I would say to that would probably again be that Season 2 starter with Discord. Now, that would be the biggest, like, single event where she's confronting her shadow. But if we step outside of villain specials, because both a lot of what Twilight's shadow side is actually related to how she interacts with other people, it seems. Her initial problem was that she never talked to anyone. Her worst fears, such as in Lesson 0, which actually probably deals more directly with her shadow in the most mundane sense of it, and the most mundane sense most other people would look at it, is her confronting her, not only her own sense of self-worth, like the idea that perhaps she is worthless, and I'm totally being an armchair psychiatrist right now, or psychologist right now. I totally understand that, by the way, because I know I'm sounding really pretentious. So, yeah, I would say that was like the closest aspect of it in front of the mentor. Her closest aspect of it to an enemy would probably have been Discord after he split the friendship group apart and determined that even Celestia's ideas were not worth it. The idea that, there was a debate I saw a long time ago, the idea that when suffering, I'm not a Christian, but I do like this, it is an interesting idea to think about, the idea that when Jesus suffers upon the cross, for even but a moment, he too is an atheist from all the suffering. And there's that scene of Twilight where she sheds the tear after the elements don't work, the first time they try and seal them away when they're all discorded, only to briefly re-find her way through the help of her guiding master, Celestia. Now, okay, do I like bat ponies? Yes, love bat ponies. More specific, fandom OCs would be canon. Okay. Probably Echo. I really do enjoy those edits, those real-life MLP edits, and I have a bias for bat ponies. I admit. Equestria Girl's Forgotten Friendship. I want to see that, because that character kind of relates to my own insecurities as well. I'm pretty sure we've all had those moments. I haven't seen it, so I want to. Thank you, Solaris Azrael, but yeah, if no one else has any questions, I should always wait a couple minutes before I say that, because someone always has one as I'm about to go further. But if there are no other questions, then I thank you all for coming to my first panel, as clunky as it probably was, and I certainly hope you enjoyed listening. Okay then, I hope you all are still enjoying RAMCon. Oh, someone is asking me to stop. So I believe if that stop sign is for one more question, I believe that I'll take that as the last question before going off. But I do hope you are all enjoying RAMCon and enjoying the other panels. I have seen My Little Pony, the movie, yes. Do you have a specific question about that, or were you just wondering if I've seen it? Oh, right. Yeah, I'll answer Prius's question above, but then I'll go on. Actually, I don't know who Anon Philly is, unfortunately, so I can't comment, but Anyway, I do hope you guys enjoyed the panel. If you want further discussion, there is a text chat in the server of RAMCon. So anyway, see you around, everyone, and enjoy RAMCon. Goodbye.